All right, everybody, I did promise you that we were done with free agency chatter, but I lied to you because some stuff happened over the weekend, and I felt like we needed just one more show. We'll try to keep this one to 25 minutes or less because there's really only 4 more things that I thought were show relevant to talk about. And then, at least the plan, is to start getting into the individual teams. Hi, I'm Dan Vespers. Thanks as always for tuning in. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. It continues to be awesome. The growth here at Old Man Squad just ticking up every little day. We've got shows coming out, 1, 2, sometimes even 3 shows a day, I think is actually happening today. And that's just going to keep going up as we get into fantasy draft season, which right now is about, give or take, 1 month away. We almost made it. Let's dive straight into the fun. Today, the first player we're going to talk about is not a player at all, but a trade. A 3-team trade. Ooh, how juicy. Shams tweets, the Clippers, Jazz, and Heat have agreed to a trade that sends Norman Powell from the Clippers to Miami, John Collins from the Jazz to the Clippers, and Kevin Love, slow-mo Kyle Anderson, and a 2027 Clippers second rounder to the Utah Jazz. If you were wondering, Kevin Love and Kyle Anderson are probably not going to play in Utah. That team has finally fully embraced the mega tank. They embraced it, so I don't want to gloss over the fact that they've been tanking pretty hard. But now there's no sugarcoating it. There's no, we could play Colin Sexton and John Collins for 18 minutes a game and then bench him for half the month. Those guys are not there anymore. Jordan Clarkson's been bought out. Utah has finally pulled the plug on anybody basically over the age of about 23. So don't get it twisted. These old goats are not about to play in Utah. Expect them to end up somewhere else, or basically like player coaches. All those things are distinct possibilities. The players in this trade that we need to discuss are Norman Powell and John Collins. Let's start with Norman Powell because he's coming off a terrific season last year that was obviously a bit tied to Kawhi Leonard either being there or not there. He finished at number 77 per game in 9-cat. Missed 22 games. That was certainly the downside. And Norm has had some injury issues throughout his career. Got off to an amazing start. And then, to no one's surprise, faded as the Clippers got more healthy. Depending on what happens in Miami over the next 3 months, we can make a better assessment of what Norman Powell is about to be. But basically, Kyle Anderson was a $9 million contract. Kevin Love was a $4 million contract. And they had to get these things to get a little bit closer. The Clippers sending out a pick, I think, may have covered the rest of it. But forget the contract stuff for a minute. Just look at the roster in Miami. They already have Terry Rozier, who got cleared, by the way, of all the weird, there was an investigation into there was gambling stuff. I forget exactly. He got cleared. So Rozier is, I guess, available. We'll go with that for now. Andrew Wiggins is still there. Tyler Hero is the shooting guard wing of the future in Miami. Bam Adebayo and Khalil Ware are likely to soak up a lot of minutes. By the way, I started with Terry Rozier because I'm just sort of looking at players that are generally in the same position on the floor as Norman Powell. The Heat picked up Simona Fontecchio, sent out Duncan Robinson. That's a little bit of a wash. Nikola Jovic, whenever he gets back in the mix, is someone that they do want to play a lot, and they just signed Davion Mitchell to a 2-year deal to play him a lot. So Norman Powell goes from being, I think you could probably argue, the third offensive option on the Clippers this past year. For a while, he was the second offensive option, and then you can slot Ivica Zubac in there wherever you want. But for a while, it was James Harden and Norman Powell both getting a ton of opportunity. And then Kawhi came in, and that bumped Norm way down the pecking order. I don't know that, I guess we could say Tyler Hero is the guy in Miami that took 18 shots a game where, Kawhi, once he got himself going, he was also in that kind of 18 range. James Harden was 16 and a half shots a game this last year, slightly lower as the team got healthy, but he was more efficient, and there were all the assists and the free throws. So, yeah, I think you could probably say that the two top guys on the Clippers did more usage-wise this last year than the two top guys on Miami, which was basically Hero and Adebayo. But Miami just has more guys because and Zubats was fantastic this season, but he was 12 shots, and they all basically came as a result of somebody else creating the shot for him. Not 100%, but most of them. The Heat are going to have to placate an Andrew Wiggins number of shots, whatever that turns out to be, which, by the way, this last year was higher than the number that Ivica Zubats was taking. One would also assume that, I don't know what Rozier's numbers are going to look like, but Fontecchio, if he gets in there as well, Davion Mitchell is probably going to play a bunch, and Nikola Jovic. Those guys all rolled together are probably going to be generally more than the guys the Clippers had behind Norman Powell this last season as well, because the Clippers went from Powell to Zubats to, they traded for Bogdan Bogdanovic partway through the year, and that was easy to argue like the guy who was going to take shots, but like Derrick Jones Jr. wasn't taking shots. Ben Simmons, when he showed up, he wasn't taking shots. Chris Dunn was there most of the year. He didn't take shots. Clippers didn't have anybody else that wanted to actually shoot the basketball. The Heat have a couple of guys. So if you're looking at this last season and you're trying to figure out, does Norman Powell's arrow go up or down? I'd say it's a pretty clear down. Or at the very least, close to what he was doing when the Clippers were at full health, which was more like 13, 14 shots a game and sat outside the top 100. In fact, the shooting percentages were way low for him, so there's sort of an artificially low ranking. But he was number 246 over his last 20 games last year. I don't think Norm is going to be that bad this season, but I don't think that he's worth drafting. You know what is worth drafting? An account over at Bet Online, because they continue to be your number one source for sports betting action. With baseball in full swing, football and NFL futures right around the corner, Bet Online has more ways to stay in on the action with the latest odds, news, scores, and even live in-game betting. If you're wondering, as I record this show, there is live in-game betting happening right now on tennis. Wimbledon singles is happening as I'm recording this show. Soccer, a European Women's Championship is happening. There's apparently something called a club friendly. There's the Africa Cup of Nations on the women's side. That's also in soccer. The 125K Newport, a women's singles event. I don't even know what the hell these things are. There's a bunch of tennis going on right now. You got the, I think there's some G League basketball happening. WNBA. I forgot to say that last time. You got boxing. We already talked about NFL futures. You can actually bet on the first NFL games of the year. Did I say MMA? There's MMA in there as well. So many things to get down on over at Bet Online. And in between games, head to the Bet Online casino with all top Vegas-style games, including poker, a live casino, and blackjack, plus a bunch of games that I, personally, don't understand, but I've certainly seen their names as I walk past tables in casinos across the Western United States. Head to Bet Online today. Take advantage of the industry-leading VIP program with level-up bonuses and weekly cash boosts. Bet Online, the game starts here. Which brings us to Jan Collins. Am I saying that right? Is it Jan Collins? John Collins has a brilliantly translatable fantasy game. He always has. It has, over the years, fluctuated a little bit, but even then, it wasn't all that much. And last year, we finally got to see in half a season what John Collins looks like when teams trust him a little bit. He played 30 and a half minutes, mind you, not full starters minutes, but was basically a guy. There were like 5 guys that were all fighting for the same piece of the pie in Utah, and nobody really, outside of typically Lauri Markkanen, but he wasn't very healthy, has a claim to more of it than anybody else. So John Collins took 13 and change shots per game last year, averaged 19 and 8 with 1.5 threes, 2 assists, a steal, a block, 53% from the field, 85% at the free throw line. He was a 9-cat near darling, basically only a negative small one in turnovers at 2.6, and then assists, but like, how many did you want to get out of a power forward center eligible guy? 2 is fine there. He was awesome. He was number 44. And I think he was better than that at the beginning of the year before they started sagging the minutes and giving him all those days off. I don't think that he's going to get 13 to 14 shots a game for the Clippers. The Harden and Kawhi are obviously going to be the two main horses, just things that Utah didn't really have last year. And then Ivica Zubac and Brook Lopez are going to be soaking up basically all of the center minutes. So the role for Collins is not as clearly defined as it was when he was on the floor for Utah. But even if the usage rate goes down, I do think the minutes are going to be pretty good. Someone in my Twitter mentions was like, hey, how are they going to find him minutes if they want to play Kawhi at the 4? I think the answer to that is they're just probably not going to play Kawhi at the 4, at least not as often. And so you'll get Harden as one of the two guards, probably some other guard, whoever that might be. Kawhi the 3, Collins the 4, Zubac the 5, Brook Lopez the backup 5. Could they play the two bigs at the same time? Probably not. Kawhi can always slide up and play some 4 as kind of like the backup 4 almost. And then, Derek Jones Jr., he can play the 3 or the 4. He's fast and spindly enough where he doesn't need to size up. And so we just kind of have to think about it that way. But they just went out and got this dude. It didn't cost them much to do it other than Norman Powell. But that alone, I think, is a good indicator that they felt like they needed to address a lack of power forward. That the Clippers felt like they had an abundance of shooting guard, small forward guys that they could use, like Bogdan Bogdanovic, who's still there, and Derek Jones, who's still there, that Norman Powell became somewhat superfluous. So however they decide to stack this up, whether it's play Bogdan in the starting 5 as the starting shooting guard or go Chris Dunn and run small but defensive in the backcourt, John Collins is going to play a ton of minutes at the 4. Probably 30 would be my guess. I'm off by a little bit at times, but like Zubac played 33, Norm played 33. There isn't much of a reason to think that John Collins can't basically play the number of minutes that Norman Powell played. I don't think that this was like a way to clear out minutes for somebody else. Maybe. I guess it's possible. But I do think John Collins is going to be up around 30 minutes a game. I think there's a decent shot that he gets 11, 12 shots per game, maybe instead of 13. So will there be a step back over his numbers from last year? Yeah, but he's also going to be trying to play the entire year. What does that drop him back to instead of top 45? I mean, it feels like top 75 is still well within reach for a roto darling. John Collins is a roto darling. He's not bad at anything. He fits the mold of someone you'd want to draft with your 6th or 7th round pick in any format because he's not going to hurt you in a ton of places. And like, regardless of what your head-to-head team build is, he can slot in. Like, you need most of the stuff he's good at, specifically because there are a bunch of things that he's good at. He doesn't have the like one category that he's amazing at. He's, right down the middle in a ton of offensive categories. The only way to, like, you can try to look through the numbers for John Collins and see if you can punt something to push him down outside the top 100. And from last year, there wasn't a category. If you punted a few of the things he was good at, you could push him outside the top 100. But that would be, your team build would have to line up really well for you not to have a need for John Collins. Now, let's say that you do have a need for him. If you're, I don't know, just need a big man, great. He does all that stuff. There were probably more rebounds available in Utah, although Walker Kessler mostly played at the beginning of the year too. So his job is not going to be that different playing alongside Walker Kessler versus playing alongside Ivica Zubac. He's not a traditional floor spacer, but like we said, he hit 1.5 threes last year. That'll get it done. So I like John Collins this coming season. I think he's going to be a much safer play, and it's going to come down to where he gets drafted. Let's go to the simplest of the news that broke over the weekend. Free agent guard Ryan Rollins, who we've talked about on this show. No, actually, that was on a different show, I think, with Adam King. That was it was on the Old Man Squad YouTube channel, but it was technically part of the Stuff It show feed. Ryan Rollins has agreed to a 3-year, $12 million deal to return to the Milwaukee Bucks. This is really only notable because it puts one more hole in the, Kevin Porter Jr. is going to have to do some stuff this coming year storyline, which no longer is a guarantee because Vasilija Micic also can play point guard, and now Ryan Rollins can also play point guard. I think this probably pushes Kevin Porter Jr. into the I would only draft him in points leagues, or if we find out Giannis is getting moved department, because then obviously everything gets, the snow globe gets jacked around about as fast as you can for the Bucks if Giannis is gone. Everything changes, all the usage changes. As long as Giannis is still there, and Miles Turner's still there, and Kuzma's still there, and Portis is still there, and Gary Trent came back, and now with Ryan Rollins in and Micic, it just doesn't seem like the path to Porter being able to do a bunch of stuff every game is the same. And we know that there are some pretty good shortcomings to his game. So Kevin Porter Jr. is a guy I think you should be looking at the very end of points leagues draft, but I don't think I'm going down that path in 9-cat anymore. And that's why this Ryan Rollins news is important, is because it impacted somebody that we talked about a little bit earlier on, on a different episode of Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. Let's go to number 3 on today's show, and that is Memphis continuing to move bodies, but this one not a big name, but kind of an interesting one for fantasy purposes. And that trade is the Memphis Grizzlies are sending center Jay Huff to the Indiana Pacers for 1 second-round pick and a second-round pick swap, sources told Shams over at ESPN. This is a little bit frustrating because I was hoping that when he was healthy enough to play that we'd get a healthy dose, healthy of Isaiah Jackson. But this probably creates a bit of a timeshare and a logjam, as well as the fact that just a few moments ago, actually, when did this happen? Not that long ago, that I think the Pacers brought back James Wiseman as well. So there are suddenly a number of centers in Indiana that sadly puts a damper on our hope for any one of them. So Wiseman is going to get to play some, and Huff is going to get to play some. And when he gets healthy, Isaiah Jackson's going to get to play some. And all that leaves us with a gross and ugly timeshare. Bum, 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 bum. The good news is, if anyone can separate themselves, 2 of the 3 of those guys have pretty darn good fantasy game. Isaiah Jackson can post juicy field goal percent, rebounds, steals, and blocks numbers when he gets decent minutes. Jay Huff is more of the slightly more efficient stretch version. He can put up good blocks, threes, and percentages, which is kind of a fun combo to get out of a clunky old center that isn't playing very much. But there have to be some kind of consistent minutes. If you look at the numbers from Jay Huff last year, there were stretches where he was getting 19, 20 minutes a game, and he was actually posting fantasy value. I do call into question whether those numbers would have held for an entire year, even if the minutes had actually stuck. Because it did feel like some of the rate that he was on was unsustainable. Like he had a 4-block game and a 6-block game. He had 10 blocks over 34 minutes in 2 games against Washington and Portland. And that kind of floated which was what was otherwise a fine block rate, but not that high, if that makes any sense. And like, I guess you could say the threes were probably going to stick, but looking more at kind of like the overall numbers for Huff, he never really had a ton of playing time, but like he took 3 threes a game in 11 and a half minutes last year. His rate of firing shots up was extraordinary. And I don't know that that's a thing that holds in any place. But certainly the blocks number is the one that really jumped out. A block in 11 and a half minutes a game. Like, I don't think you could extrapolate that to say he was going to get 2 blocks if he played 22 minutes. I don't think that was going to happen. I think we saw, a couple of giant block games. He added 10 just sort of spaced in there. And then you roll that with all the other games he had, and he probably would have been more in the ones. So is Jay Huff as great as we saw for stretches last year? Probably not. If he got 25 minutes a game, would he be fantasy startable? Absolutely. And there's a possibility that there are stretches where that happens. Let's see who's healthy for Indiana on opening night. Like, they might go into this year where Jay Huff is the starting center and he plays 24 minutes a game for a few weeks or a month or whatever it is. But we can't do anything with that now. End result of this conversation is just put him on your radar. Keep Jay Huff kind of in the back of your mind as you're going through lists, because he's not going to be ranked particularly high when leagues open in a month. And you're going to be like, all right, I'm keeping one eye on you, Jay. Let me see how training camp goes. Let's see how some of the preseason rolls out. And if you are looking like maybe you're going to get a role, then we can push you up a little bit. And finally, the fourth and last thing we're going to talk about on today's show, which I'm praying is officially the last free agency thing that we need to cover on the program before we start breaking down individual teams. This is kind of a big one. The Houston Rockets are trading Cam Whitmore, this was a couple days ago now, to the Washington Wizards for 2 second-rounders. That's a bargain basement way to get Cam Whitmore. I really like what Washington got here. They went out and got a guy who has a lot of untapped ability, but doesn't at all have the reality profile that the Rockets wanted to lean into, which is tough-nosed, defense first, like grind you out, beat you in the trenches. And unfortunately, in the playoffs, other teams were sort of like a little more ready for that. And that's why the Rockets got bounced. But then they added Kevin Durant, where it's like, okay, well, we'll beat you in the trenches for a long time, and then let's give it to one of the most efficient scorers that ever walked the earth. And I think of that scene in Wayne's World 2. Zang. That's excellent. So Whitmore now figures to get some kind of a chance, which he really hasn't in Houston. There were brief moments, not even really so much this season as the year before, where he was able to play a bit more. And so we have some data on Whitmore's fantasy game. And from just looking for, like, are there games where he played 26, 27 minutes? Because it does kind of feel like Washington's going to shoehorn him into a bunch of playing time and just see what they've got now. He hit a bunch of three-pointers. He scored a lot. He actually rebounded okay. I don't know that folks are going to remember that he's not a bad rebounding wing. He does not pass at all. He gets pretty low defensive numbers, but you can usually extrapolate those from where they're at to where they might be. Because, like, rookie year, 19 minutes a game, he was at 0.6 steals, 0.4 blocks. This past season, he was at 16 minutes a game, 0.6 steals, 0.3 blocks. I do think that a steal per game is pretty darn reachable for Whitmore if they give him 25, 26, 27 minutes a night. It's hard to know what the block number is going to look like. Maybe half a block, 1.1 steals, half a block. That's good enough to float it. But you're looking at probably between 2 and 3 threes a game. I think you're looking at probably in the 14 to 17 points per game range, with the possibility to maybe go a little bit higher than that. Field goal percent is not awful because he is a pretty good shooter. Free throw percent leaves it something to be desired. And that's probably where we have to sort of squint a little bit and say, okay, well, if this is a guy we're going to take a plunge on in a new spot, we got to be in that part of fantasy drafts where you're just taking chances. Because there is no safe floor for Whitmore in Washington for a couple of reasons. Number one, just like we talked about, he doesn't get assists. His percentages are fine, but not great. Or the field goal percentage, I should say, is fine, but not great. The free throw percent was pretty bad so far. For a guy who's a good shooter, you hope that that's going to work its way up. And he's going to a place where the Wizards have collected a bunch of aged veterans that shouldn't be playing at all, but might a little bit. Because remember, they sent out Jordan Poole already. But they do have wings. They've got Koulibaly. They've got Keyshawn George. I knew I was forgetting somebody relevant. They extended Justin Champagnie. I think he's got a bunch of team options, but they like what they've got there. They've got other young guys, too, that are not technically, I guess, wings, but might see time there. Is Kispert still there, or did they lose him already? I got to dig that one up. Bub Carrington is going to play a bunch. One would assume that A.J. Johnson is probably going to play at least some amount of time. So there's all these guys now, and you add Cam Whitmore to the mix. It's not a guarantee that he steps into 30 minutes. It's a guarantee, I think, that he steps into like 24, 25. But there's a big gap there for guys that aren't super diversified in their fantasy game. Like his 9-cat game is not that great, but there's a high ceiling there. If he turns out to be a guy the Wizards want to build around, if they're like, hey, go be Jordan Poole, he could basically go be Jordan Poole, but with better rebounding, no assists, and a bad free throw percent. What does that turn out to be? I think we kind of have to think that one through. Let's take a moment and think about a best case scenario. Let's say that Whitmore does get 30 minutes a ball game. He could be a 20-point scorer in 30 minutes a game on a team that doesn't have really a top offensive option, or a guy that's going to be relied upon to go fire up a crap ton of shots. So what is that worth, and how good could it be? Is CJ McCollum going to get to play it all? Like, there's all these things that kind of hang in the balance. But I do think that when you get to around pick, I wouldn't take him at like pick 85, but you do get into an area in fantasy drafts after about pick 75 where everyone's kind of taking shots, and then you just grade out how risky the shots are versus what the upside is. I think there's a decent amount of upside in Whitmore if everything breaks his way. There's also a very low floor because he's a bad free throw shooter, and if he gets a ton of usage, he's going to take more free throws. Or what if they decide not to give him a boatload of playing time? So there's a lot of ways this could go right, and there's a lot of ways that this could go wrong. And that kind of, to me, tends to fall into the players that you look at, like between 100 and 115. That's probably where I would start to think about Whitmore, and then we'll probably get more information come, season run up when we get a little more data on how the Wizards want to use him. But he's certainly a guy we should have on our radars. I think he's a guy that probably does and probably should end up getting drafted in the majority of fantasy leagues, because you go figure 13 times 12. So you're, deeper than 150 picks there. 156. I know how to do the damn math. Don't yell at me. And he'll definitely go in drafts. So the question becomes, like, do we take him in the late 8th, 9th, 10th? I think I'd like to get him in the 10th. Maybe he's just a guy that needs a new place to go explode. And I would say today, July 7th, I would lean towards trying to target Cam Whitmore, but we have to figure out when it's going to be. And that's that. I think that's now the end of the free agency stuff. It was foolish of me to say to you on Thursday that I was done with free agency chat, because then there was going to be a bunch of days before we had to do another show. But now we can do them. We got shows one after the other here coming up. So I feel like I should be more confident in saying that this was the end of it. Doesn't matter. We're going to start talking about teams. That's what's next. Stay tuned. Like, rate, subscribe on your way out. I'm Dan Vespers, at Dan Vespers on Twitter. Old Man Squad on Blue Sky. Old Man Squad on Twitter is the whole network feed, which is cool. Then you know when all the other shows come up as well. I'm done. I'll see you guys tomorrow.